Hello everyone, and welcome to The Spawn Point, with me, Matt Jackson. On my right-hand side, Mr. Andy Webb.
Hello again.
Below me, as always, Steve Barnett.
Howdy, partners.
And our special guest. We were going to have a real special guest, but next week we will. But for the time being, you have the presence and the magic of Austin Powers himself. Everyone say hello to Austin.
Hello, Austin.
He's saluting at us in a kind of weird... I don't know.
Don't know what that was.
Actually, before we start this podcast, I want to point out Steve bought something, or actually received something very cool recently. What is it?
Steve received something very long, well, very stubby and cylindrical.
No. What did you receive, Steve?
I've done all the testing on it. I did it in the microwave and also very hot water. It is the Spawn Point mug.
Yeah.
And you can buy yours at our store. We have a US store and a UK store. Buy yours today.
Well, we only really have the US store now because YOLO
okay.
Swaggins, that's why.
Okay,
well, no, because the delivery's cheaper on the US than is the UK.
What's the UK?
Well, it was for Steve, I think.
Really? Wow, okay.
I don't know why, but yeah. But the bottom line is that you can get a mug like Steve's. It's got a little symbol on it. If you want a mug with us ugly three mugs on it, us ugly three mugs on a mug, buy the mug.
Our mugs on that mug.
Yeah, our mugs
really
on that
good.
mug.
It's really deep.
Yeah, it's a regular mug, but it's just
It goes in deep.
a little bit more.
And
You get a lot of coffee or tea in it, or beer, or vodka, whiskey.
But anyway,
whatever you want.
let's get to the nitty gritty. Let's get to the topic of this week, which is all about frame rates. So we've all had a chance to read an article which was comparing 30 frames with 60 frames per second. In particular, the whole controversy with Xbox One and PlayStation 4. So we're talking really about the comparison between the two, 30 and 60, and does it really matter? So I don't know who wants to start off here, but I would just like to throw something in before we actually get going with this.
I thought you were going to say, I don't know who wants to start off here, but I'm going to give you my opinion anyway.
I'll give my opinion anyway, yeah. Yeah, so I just want to say that it's worth noting that, well, I am going to give my personal take. Just a short one. That's all I'm going to do. Basically, I think it depends on what you're playing as to how important frame rates are. So 30 frames per second on one game can be much more noticeable and affect the experience than another game. But what do you guys think?
Yeah, something like a card game. So take Hearthstone, for example. I don't think you need like 150 bajillion frames per second on that. Well, I wouldn't say it's acceptable at 30, but you can get away with doing it at that low level and playing it at that low level. So yeah, I'd agree with to an extent on that. Steve looks like he's...
I know, he looks like he's
really,
about to burst.
He's really like finding it funny.
It's just,
but like,
sorry, it's just the way that you said it. A bazillion like FPS. We wouldn't even.
But yeah,
we wouldn't be able to see that.
So yeah, I mean, yeah, 60 FPS on Hearthstone isn't really going to be much noticeable. I think in particular with, well, FPS is important. You know, first-person shooters like Call of Duty. That's, you know, I mean, you notice it more with that in terms of when you're moving and stuff. Like Steve plays a lot of those kind of shooters. So, would you notice 30 compared to 60 on an FPS game?
Well, actually, on PlayStation 3, I think it's only scaled to 30. It's not 60. I don't think.
And wasn't there a thing that like a lot of games, even though they may display high frame rates, they're actually technically only they're limited to a certain cap. That's kind of like what's going on with the Xbox One, is that a lot of the games, what I've heard is that because Xbox One can't keep a steady, it can do 60 frames per second, but it can't keep it steady like the PlayStation 4 currently can. So they think rather than have it fluctuate, which is probably more noticeable, just have it a steady 30 frames per second rather than having it drop to 40 and going up to 60. But is this really important to games, to the fact where we would decide one system over another? Like, the one difference with this, like in the frames, is I know Tomb Raider Definitive Edition on the PS4 is 60 and Xbox One 30. Haven't played it myself, But just from a general kind of perspective, I kind of do notice 30 compared to 60, but I can still play a game at 30 frames per second and just enjoy it just as much, really. I'm not, is that just me not being shallow, or other people just very pretentious?
I want to kind of get involved in that one because I've actually played Call of Duty Ghosts on PlayStation 3, and I actually played it on the X1 around my friend's house. Now, obviously going from PlayStation 3 to X1, it's going to be completely different, but when I played it on X1, it was, you could see the difference between the PlayStation, not the X1. The X1 was a lot better, but really, for me, I would have said the PlayStation 3 was a step backwards, obviously. But if I was going to be playing the X1 all the time, and I was going to be playing the games like COD Ghost and things like that, and I wouldn't really see too much of a difference. I suppose if you got used to that, and you played the PlayStation 4, it would be a really big difference.
What's an interesting comparison I've just thought is that, Andy, you've got the PlayStation 4 and I've got the Xbox One. Now, when I'm playing on the Xbox One, I don't necessarily play games that may necessarily be... I have only got like 3 or 4 games. I think I've only got like 3 games. But when I play, I don't go like, it's not 60 frames. I wish I had a PlayStation 4. Do you... is it the opposite for you? You're like, thank God this looks like 60 frames. I couldn't stand it if it was nice.
I have to say, because my primary gaming's on PC, any games that I need a high frame rate, I've actually just got that on PC. And I have to say, my PS4 has got a layer of dust growing on it because it's not really having that many games played on it.
But it seems like it's become like this big issue of like frame rate is such an important thing. Like, you've got a high-end PC gaming rig. Okay, but what frames per second do you get on this game? It's like...
I don't think it is.
The thing is just like, so many people are obsessed with like, I only get 300 frames per second. Like, there are people that are 300 frames per second. This guy gets 600 frames per second. It doesn't really matter when you get to a certain point, Like, when you get beyond, I'd say, 100 frames per second, it's not going to matter one frame to another, It's not like you're going to be like, this feels so immersive, this feels so... Get to a certain point, your eyes can't track it. And there's the whole debate of like, what can our eyes actually physically track? Some people say it's 60, some say it's 120, some say it's 100. I think the general gist is that it's not more than 120 based on what I've seen. So is it really important as long as it... But this is this is more like between 30 and 60, so it is got a valid argument to it. It's just me playing the Xbox One, I haven't really noticed any drops in frames, and I haven't really, it hasn't really bugged me like I can tell this isn't in 60 frames per second.
Well,
Sorry.
I was going to say, literally just before we came on, I was playing a bit of Counter-Strike Global Offensive, and I had a little frame rate counter on in the corner, and it was going from about 180, and it tanked to about 90 in some places, and I could actually notice it quite discernibly that it had tanked down to 90 and like lost half the frame rate.
But with it having it displayed in the corner, were you constantly checking it like, I wonder what it is now, Like if it dropped...
No, it was. I could actually notice a discernible difference in the smoothness of the gameplay. And obviously 30 to 60, that's a double the frame rate, and 30 I find can be quite jagged and just if you're playing like a first person shooter or something like that.
Yeah, that can suffer sometimes. But let me throw this one in there. If Xbox One, PlayStation 4's got 60 frames per second, X1's got 30. If it was that bad, Xbox One would have never released their console just for, because people wouldn't buy it. Do you see what I mean? So, obviously there is a valid argument there. But obviously, first-person shooters will kind of suffer because with 30 frames, there's only so much. But with 60, it's a lot more. But...
I was just going to say, I was having this debate on Twitter with one of our partners in the network, and they were complaining about, well, not really complaining, but like they were talking about Minecraft, the frame rate issues in Minecraft, that like they've got this whatever setup and it only played 200 or something rather than 300, and they could notice it because it was really buggy or something, and I put a tweet out something like along the lines of, to be honest, I find with Minecraft frame rate isn't really an issue, which apparently not everybody thinks that is true. But like, I think with a game like Minecraft, I don't really notice. Frame rate's not important to me. Like, it doesn't. I don't really, especially at that level. Like, it really is dependent on the game, I think.
When I had my very bad PC, when I first started out YouTube, I bought Minecraft, and my PC, I think it was only running like 3 frames a second. I definitely saw a very big difference to what I'm getting now. So, but FPS for Minecraft for me is not really an issue for now. For my PC I've got now. But back when I had my very first PC, I could definitely tell there was something wrong.
Yeah, I mean, I think it depends on what your primary gaming platform is as well. Like for sort of the PC master race, and everyone sort of gets a bit snobby, I think, about frame rates. And so, like you're saying, 300 frames per second, yeah, that's what I want. But up at that level, 120 is sort of a decent level, and above that, again, I don't think that there's much difference there. 60 is sort of the bare minimum that I like in my games.
I've got an interesting question. So obviously, before, like, you haven't really heard when it comes to consoles, you don't really hear people talking about, I get this much, because everybody's got the same console. The frame rate doesn't differ, and it doesn't really become an issue. Like you said, the PC Master Race comparing frame rates. No, I get this, I get that, because they know they can get better. It's not like everyone's got the same thing. But like, why is it now that frame rates for the next gen systems saying, this is it simply because the PS4 is twice as many frames? And that's meant to be some kind of way of spurring a console war?
I guess
you never heard people talking about that for the PlayStation 3 or Xbox
I guess
360.
we've just really gotten to this sort of standard where everyone's saying like, 60 is the minimum, and it's like this next generation of consoles comes out, and some of them aren't getting up to 60, whereas in previous iterations, like some of the games have. In other consoles, like, well, why is something that's coming out that's this sort of next gen, why can't it hit this sort of minimum standard that everyone likes to strive for?
People have become a bit more selective, a bit more picky about what's acceptable and what's not really.
I think the reason people who play consoles aren't as selective is because it's harder to do frame rates. Because if I think how would I measure frame rates? Yeah. Well, I can think on a PC, there's lots of frame rate software you can just load up and have it up in the corner, whereas on a console, it's harder to judge that. I don't know if that's why, or if everyone's playing like COD on the PS4, for instance, they're all going to be playing at the same frame rate, whereas if I'm playing it against someone else on the PC, if they've got a better rig than me, they're going to have a better frame rate, so they can probably respond quicker to everything that I'm doing. And then that's when people start kicking off. Because if you remember back in the day, it was all about lag. Like, WTF lag.
Kill this guy. It's lag.
But let me put this one out there. Like, PlayStation 3, Xbox 360, and all that, they all put out 30 frames a second, yeah? The PS4 comes out, it can put out 60 frames per second. Now, everyone gets a little bit greedy. Everyone wants that 60 frames per second. Why didn't they just leave it at where it was at 30 frames per second? You got 2 good consoles there. Like, most people have got used to 30 frames per second on consoles, unless you're a PC user. So why did they feel the need to put it up to 60? Because it's only going to cause a war between the console users.
I mean, I'd like to say that there are definitely some games on PS3 and 360 that ran at 60.
Okay, yes. Okay, so some games did, but majority of games on PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360 ran on 30 frames.
I think one of the things that I've come to, I think this is the thing that's really kind of silly about the whole thing, is that if no one had mentioned anything about frames for the console, nobody would be none the wiser, Like, is anybody really going to sit there and be able to analyse, compare it to, like, their PC 60 frames? It's because Sony, I'm pretty sure that the way it's played out is that Sony made a statement about 60 frames per second because, people are more infatuated about frame rates, so they video game journalists are like, so what's the frame rate like? What kind of frame rate do we get on these console games? If it's next gen, it must be good. And PlayStation said 60, and then, Xbox couldn't lie. They were put in a position where they say, well, most of our games are set at 30. And then everyone's like, oh my god, this is unacceptable, or like, this means that PlayStation 4 is the superior console, which it doesn't, it's just, like, they're both good consoles, but, the frame rate isn't what decides which console's better, in my opinion. It kind of, you need it to be at a certain point. The previous PC I had compared to this one, I've had this gaming PC for I think about four years now. Before that, I had a Dell PC that was not a gaming PC at all. I tried to play the original Borderlands on it on the lowest settings possible, and it always crashed at the beginning of the game when you're getting out of the bus. And the frame rates, because I managed to launch, what's it called? Fraps, that's it. I managed to launch Fraps, and the frames were like 4 frames per second. Now, something like that is obviously, you can't play it. It's like, but 30 frames, it's at the point where you have to really, I find, have to study it to really notice it. Like, unless you really pay attention, you might be like, I can see a few differences here. But like, if you're just generally playing stuff, I think, you have to be really kind of obsessive and quite pedantic to really have to point something out like that and make a big deal out of it. But I'm convinced that it's something just to kind of add a bit of flame to the console war or whatever, try and get a little bit of a just controversy or discussion going on. I kind of think that's what's going on here.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure that's one of the reasons. However, I can definitely tell the difference between 30 and 60. There's definitely a clear-cut line.
But it's not to the point where I hope it's not to the point where it bugs you and you're like, oh, this is unbearable, like 30 frames.
It does really? Bug me quite yeah.
But
but if you're,
again, it depends what game it is, like we were saying at the start.
But at the end of the day, if you're just a normal person that just does a 9-to-5 job, doesn't know about computers or anything like that, just comes home, plays his Call of Duty or whatever he wants to play or she wants to play, then 30 or 60 frames won't even bother you. Like, this is what I don't get. But I don't understand why people sometimes make such a big issue out of it. The Xbox One, PS4, who cares? Both of the consoles have good, features with them. So I don't understand why people make, I got 60 frames, you only got 30. Like, who cares?
It's just that, like I said, it's just one of those things that people are trying to find some kind of format of discussion to base it around. But like, it's kind of like you said about Call of Duty. Like, when I was at school, when I was playing like Call of Duty 4 or World at War or something, and I didn't kind of sit down and go, I wonder what the frame rate's going to be like today. I didn't sit down and kind of analyze it. I just played it. Didn't care if it was 30, if it was 60. Like, I would be none the wiser. I was more paying attention to getting a good, good kill-death ratio and killing plenty of people and getting unlocks and making sure not to die. Like, I was too focused on the gameplay to really go, oh, frame just dropped. Like, I just get my glasses on. Oh, the frame is up. That's 29. I'm going to speak to Microsoft about that. It's not really to that level of...
The trouble is, in this day and age now, people look at the most minute things. Back in when we were younger, all we wanted to do was just play the game. It didn't matter whether you got 29 frames or 30 frames.
Did you ever hear anyone complaining about the frame rate on Super Mario 64?
Oh my god.
Yeah, but right, it's something like Super Mario. In fact, I'm going to look at the frame rate.
Really? I reckon it's probably, 20 frames? It depends if you play it on an emulator. This is the variable. It depends if you play it on the Ouya, which has got an emulator thing on it. Super Mario 64 is like 10 frames. If even that. I mean, it's really bad.
I mean, I think it's sort of a show of the times as well, because if you imagine back when you were younger, a game in sort of like 420 or 320 by 240 or something, that was okay. But now can it run at, well, definitely for me, can it run at least 720 or 1080? And that's a good resolution to shoot for. So I think that's the same. Everyone's got used to the higher resolution rates in some games, so it's sort of expected in some of them. Like like the resolutions.
60 frames is like an optimum kind of thing, really, because it's like it's like the perfect kind of setting you want. If you can have a consistent 60 frames per second, it's like you never notice any kind of like, like thinking about it now, I do notice sometimes in Titanfall when I'm playing, the frames might drop and I might, just a little tad, and I might just kind of feel that the movement isn't as fluid for a few seconds, but it's not to the point where I'm like, I can't play this game, it's not fun. I wish I had a system that, or wish this game did 60 frames per second because I can't play it if it wasn't, and I can't fully appreciate this game. It's never been like that for me. It's just been that I can enjoy a game more if it's 60 frames per second, but I won't necessarily not enjoy it if it's half as many frames, So it's kind of, it's good to have.
It doesn't ruin your day.
Yeah, it doesn't, it's not a big deal for me, unless, it was when I first got my gaming PC 4 years ago, because I was obsessed that I've spent all this money, and it's meant to kind of prove that it can get these kind of frames, because that was my way of measuring the performance of the game and all the games that I played, and how well they ran on my system. And maybe that's the way people are seeing it, is that the games can perform better, will look better and run better and feel better to play if they're running at 60 frames on a PS4 system, because that's kind of the way I saw it with my gaming PC rig when I first got it. That was my way of indicating, I've maxed out the settings and the frames aren't really dropping. I can play all these games and not have to worry about not meeting the requirements, So
I just want to say something
more of a bigger deal for PC though.
I just want to say something. I just looked on a article, and there's a lot of problems at the moment with Call of Duty Ghosts on PS4. Now,
there's a lot of problems with that. Just full stop.
Yeah, no. But what I mean,
system is just
no. But what I mean is that it's having a hard time keeping up on the frames with the PS4 at 60.
Okay. Have you got a link to that?
I have got a link.
That
I will
might
send
be
you.
why. And this is what I was saying earlier about Microsoft. The Xbox One can do 60 frames. It's been proven, but I feel like they're trying to play it safe so that the frames don't. Sometimes it depends on the game and how well optimized it is. But
yeah, they even say here that the Xbox One could cope with it. But as you said, they're playing it safe. But the PS4 is having a hard time keeping up at 60 frames.
But also the PS. This is on Forbes.com. This is also saying about the fact that the Xbox is running at 720 and upscale to 1080, whereas the PS4 is running at 1080, which is also something that if it was running at 720 and upscaled, then you'd expect that the Xbox would be able to be at a high frame rate.
The only thing is though, for me, and I said this is on an individual basis, my TV only supports 720, so because I've had it for so long, 720 was kind of back then it was, 1080 was still very rare, so it will look exactly the same for me, but that's only on an individual basis.
My TV's only a 720 as well. So
most things seem to be 720. I mean, this is something that me and Andy will disagree on in terms of YouTube videos, where it's have you got that in 1080, Matt? And I'm like, no, I've got it in 720. Who does 1080? Oh, I watch everything in 1080. Otherwise, I don't
most
watch
people.
No, I understand.
I get snobby about that. It's what's 720?
Most people on YouTube only watch videos in 360. Now that is
or 480.
Not a fact. Or 480.
The automatic setting.
What is wrong with you people?
Because you don't watch it in full screen. I don't watch.
I watch it in 720, but I don't ever full screen it.
Yeah, I never full screen YouTube videos because I'm usually doing other things and checking back to it.
But most people view their videos in 480p, and the reason why that is because sometimes their internet connection just can't run any higher than 480 or 360.
Do you find it's this is kind of a little bit of a topic, but I play a YouTube video and I might listen to the audio for a bit and then check back at the video. I don't always watch all of the video. Sometimes I'll just have the audio.
Yeah, I usually chuck it on my second monitor, just have it there. And then, but at full screen, 1080. If you've got the quality there, you may as well watch it at that highest quality.
It kind of explains that behaviour of you saying that, if I want it to be in 1080p, otherwise it's not, it's not as enjoyable for me, the video's not as good. it's the same with frame rates for you. Like, if the frame rate isn't 60 frames, you're like,
I ain't playing it.
It's the behaviour, is that it's very kind of like shallow,
snobbish,
like,
isn't it?
like,
I
Well,
think
I wouldn't
that's
say shallow.
snobbish. Yeah, that's probably one of the
I
words,
think that's the way that people have an outlook on games now. I'm going to use Andy as an example.
We're all going to use him as an example. It's just
People expect to have a game or a console that can run at 60 frames. They won't play anything at all that can run at 30 frames. Who cares? Like, 3 years ago, most games ran at 30 frames per second, I know that some games did run at 60, but the majority of the games did run at 30.
Yeah,
so now they brought this 60 in. Like, they're both really good consoles, the Xbox One and the PS4. I don't understand why most people aren't ready for, the 60 frames per second or 1080 stuff, because most people still have 720 TVs or, their monitors can't cope with that,
I mean, I think the major thing with the last generation and this generation is people probably expected there to be a bigger bridge in the gap between the two systems. So because everything ran natively at pretty much 780 or sorry, not 780, geez, 720. I don't think I saw any games running on my PS3 at 1080. There might be the odd one or two, but everyone goes to this next generation. Okay, so we expect them to be at a higher frame rate and a higher level of graphics than 1080.
So I've just thought of this is like a comparison of which one would you rather prefer. So this is predominantly for PC because you can't really change the graphics settings for console. It's preset on whatever setting. But on the PC, now an example for me would be when we were playing Chivalry a few weeks ago. When I played that, the frame I could. So this is the thing. Would you rather play a game on lower frames but better graphics, or would you rather lower the graphics and play on a higher frame rate?
Lower graphics, high frame rate.
Because that's what I chose. Is that and some people might say that they want the best graphics, but they don't mind sacrificing the frame. Steve, what about you? Would you?
I would lower the frame rate, higher graphics.
Oh, really?
Receive the opposite.
Yeah, so, I'd want the higher graphics, more detail. Depending on what game it is, though. But depending on what game it is,
so
I wouldn't.
If you were playing something that had like first-person control, would you prefer to have better frame rate because of movement being kind of more jagged?
Yeah, but something.
So give us an example of when you've kind of made that decision or thought about making that decision.
Prime example, actually.
Increase the graphics.
Prime example: Battlefield 3 on PlayStation, on PC. My PC could handle it, but I just chose to lower the FPS and have higher graphics because I wanted to see the attention to detail. I didn't keep it there. I just wanted to have a little look, to see what it looked like with amazing graphics, like Ultra.
That's the case if it can still handle it. But what if you had to sacrifice where you can have?
Oh, right. Okay, I get what you mean.
You can have medium graphics, and you can have 60 frames per second, or you can have the best graphics, but only run us at about 30 frames per second. If it's like you have to sacrifice one of them to lessen the experience.
If my PC wasn't that good. Yeah. This is my honest opinion what I would do. I've been there with my old PC, so I know what it's like. I would have higher graphics but a lower FPS. If I had to sacrifice, yeah.
Really? That just seems odd to me,
I wouldn't go below 30 frames, obviously, if I had to, sacrifice a lot. I would only go to the bare, 30. I wouldn't go any...
So, Andy, I take you would be the opposite of that and be...
I would prefer, sacrifice... the graphical quality because I remember back in the day playing Tribes 2 at the minimum graphics quality to actually have some frame rate, because obviously that's quite I don't know if either of you played it, but that's quite a fast paced game where you have to be quite precise in where you're shooting everything, and the PC just couldn't handle it above anything other than minimum graphics levels. So it's like you had to do that to actually make it playable.
I've been in this predicament several times with when I had my older PC that was not, didn't have a graphics card at all, had really low RAM and wasn't really treated to play games, but I tried to play Borderlands, like I said before, and Team Fortress 2 was one of them I played back when it was paid for. So I paid for the game. I was like, hopefully it'll run, because it doesn't look like it's too demanding. It's still, if it's on maximum graphics, it was still running really slowly. So I found I could still enjoy the game. If I lowered the graphics, it didn't bother me too much. Just if I can have a smoother experience, that was a lot more important to me. And I guess with that being said, it's kind of segueing towards like the end of the topic, really. But I guess with that being said, frame rate does kind of play a bigger part than something like the actual graphics quality, really. When you're comparing those two.
For me though, like obviously sacrificing graphics to FPS, it depends what kind of game it is. Obviously, if something that is not attention to detail, why would you want to sacrifice FPS? But if I had to, and the game wasn't something that was that I needed the graphics for, and of course I would choose to lower the graphics and higher the FPS.
So
that's
let's just get a quick summary. 30 compared to 60. Is it something that would influence your decision over buying something like the Xbox One to the PS4? Is that a deal breaker for you? In whatever order. It's not for you, Steve.
No, it's not. No.
It depends what games could handle what games we're playing at 30, and if it was like games that are critical to it, like I wouldn't be buying first-person shooters or anything, so probably not in that respect. However, if I was playing games like COD or Battlefield, then definitely that would be a sticking point.
So if you were playing more FPS games, you think that it would be play a much bigger role? Okay.
I've got used to it, like playing on 30 frames. It doesn't really bother me, and I don't think that it really matters. But that's my opinion anyway.
Yeah, I've got my PC for that, so the stuff that I have got on the PS4. Well, I haven't really got anything because there's still nothing good out.
On that bombshell, as they say on Top Gear. So I think the general gist from us three, and Austin Powers as well, because he's somewhat played a part, I guess. We promise we will have a special guest. We 99.9% promise we will have.
If I remember for next
special
week.
guest, as long as Steve gets better at his organisation skills. But I think the general gist of it is that we think that it really does depend on the game. You can't just call the shot as to, it's a little bit similar like with the free-to-play stuff we discussed before. You can't just say that all games, it's this thing or that. It really does depend on what particular game you're playing, what type of game you're playing. But
fuck it, get a decent PC, then you won't need to worry about frame rate.
Yeah, I guess that's another thing.
Unless you got
that is the moral of the story. Which console should you get? PS4 or Xbox One? PC.
But it's time to look at the audience for this one before we go. Well, just to ask them, what do you guys think of the whole frame rate issues with the 30 compared to the 60? Is it a big deal for you? Does it depend on the game? Let us know in the comment section, and we'll try and keep an eye on the comment. We'll respond to your comments if you put one, and we can have a good old discussion about it. But that's been all from the Spawn Point from me, Andy Webb.
Goodbye, Biomugs.
Steve Barnett. Show the mug again. Product placement.
Oh.
And Austin Powers, you can't show the mug because he's a pitcher.
Because he is one.
Yeah, he's a mug.
He's a mug.
But anyway, goodbye.
Good boo.